Well, this next section is more about after you've had a loss in your family, and maybe you've lost a loved one, and putting the pieces back together from that. So that's what this is looking at. So the first thing, when there's something like that happens, then the first step in building back up is to recognize the loss. You have to acknowledge the grief, the good old English stiff upper lip, and we just press on. Eventually, the lip can't stay stiff anymore, and the grief has to come out. And so, because if you don't let it out, it can destroy you. It's like holding on to anger. It can gain power over you. And the only way the only cure for grief is to grieve, to let it happen.
That is the best way I have ever heard that put. I've got to remember that when I have clients that are just grieving. I've got one right now. I cannot ever think of what to say to truly comfort her and to respect her grieving, because and I do, but what do you say? Well, that's it.
But also just some people, it takes years.
Yeah.
And people can move on quicker.
Yeah.
I don't think it means that they're just cold apart. It just sometimes it's because they have peace that they know that their loved one is, it's safe. But
that is really good.
And different people have emotional defense kind of mechanisms, and it takes them, like you said, a little longer to get to that point. And so
it does. But the night my mom died, we were all there, and my husband and my son, my sister were just like crying crazily, and I'm a big crier, but I wasn't, and it's just because my dad was already giving me jobs to do, go call your aunt, go this, so I was just like, I had to do the business, and I wanted to do what he wanted me to do, because, he just lost his wife, my mom, and he did, my dad's not a crier though, he wasn't crying, but it was hard, because we'd been there for hours and hours while she died in the hospital, and so, but I didn't get to cry then, I had to, I did later, I could cry now if I think about it, but I was when I had to start doing the calls.
Right. Yep, you had the Martha duty.
Yeah, which is kind of how it usually is, but
that's kind of your personality probably anyway, Joanna, to have the Martha.
Yeah.
Certainly mine.
And then part of that process is accepting the reality of the loss and the fact that you've lost someone you love, and all the little things that means, even maybe annoying things, but and then as you realize those things, maybe even make a list, so you'll remember that. And so
That's really good.
one of the little things after losing my dad, he was a photographer, and he taught me, if I pick up my camera, I always put my arm through the strap.
So that it won't.
Yeah. And we were at some event at school with the kids when they were little, and it was kind of crowded, and I got jostled and my camera slipped out of my hand and it dangled on my arm, and I went, "Thanks, Dad." Well, that's
fun. Those things are fun.
So the next step is to express your loss, not just acknowledge it, but tell stories. And that's where that vigil can help. We get together, we tell stories, and because that helps ease the pain, and it also gets you out of being alone. And people we talk about, they're going to be okay as long as family's here, but once family all goes back, that's when it gets hard. And so that's where the church has to, especially with families being scattered so much now, that's where the church family really needs to be there for people. So then the next step is take time to learn about grief, that it's normal. It's part of the healing. And you can find out there's, what is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's Stages of Grief is still, I think, a really good resource. And there's support groups. And I know First Methodist has a support group for kids who have lost parents. And
building bridges. I didn't know it was First Methodist though, but that was hospice.
Oh, well, they may
maybe
use that. And we host, West Texas Counseling on Tuesday evenings hosts here a support group for parents or for family members who have lost someone to suicide. And so, and they, even as West Texas Counseling grows, and they'll at some point be able to move into their own facilities, but this group loves the great room. And I found that out because one night we needed the great room, so I moved into the Fabian room, and the leaders talked to me and said, that didn't work that night. There's something about the great room that works for them there. So.
Don't they do kind of a vigil once a year for them?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Shine a Light in September.
That's what it's called.
And this is where it can get, I mean, face your loss, not just acknowledge it, but, turn into it. Take the pain. Because pain means that you've loved and we're loved. If you don't have any pain, you've never experienced love. It's just part of it. The cross teaches us that. There's healthy and unhealthy ways of coping with grief. Probably going to pinkies and stuff like that is probably it could be an unhealthy way.
Unless you and your loved one did that together.
That's right, a little tonic might, as Paul said to Timothy, take a little wine for your stomach's sake, but.
Visiting the grave makes me smile because my mom always said that she thought that was weird, that she's like, I would never gonna go visit, like she didn't really go to visit her parents' graves. She thought, to her that just didn't mean anything. And so when my mom died, I had made a point of that, but one of my sisters will go to the cemetery and actually like hang out for hours. And it was a little country cemetery, that's actually our family cemetery. And she'll just drive down from Dallas and go to this little cemetery out there at Brownwood and just hang out. And I was like, well, if that makes you feel better, that's good. But I think to myself, I'm thinking, Mom's laughing at her. And she's like, what are you doing? Go do something else, But so I feel like if I go there, I mean, I've been there to help my dad like water and stuff, but I'm always thinking, my mom's laughing at us.
The last couple of years, we've done on All Saints Sunday, we've done a flowering of the graves for our columbarium, and we've marked each one with flowers. And I learned that from St. Francisville, because the Great Grace Church in St. Francisville is surrounded by a historic cemetery with graves that go back to the 1790s, and so there's lots of people in the parish who've got family buried out there. And after service, people file out of the church and they're handing them flowers, and everyone puts flowers on all the graves. It's really sweet. Yeah.
So you do that here too?
Yeah, I've started doing that
Sunday?
here. 2 Sundays, 7th. Yeah. And it's a little different with columbarium but it still is effective, and I thought it was neat. So, but there's one of our 8 o'clock people, Don LePac. He comes, and the first thing he does is he goes into the baptistry columbarium and sits with his wife for a couple of minutes, and he's very sweet. If you've been to Dillard's, if you don't know Don LePac, you've heard him, because he's the voice of the Dillard's announcements. So.
Does he still work there?
Oh, yes.
Is he really old?
He's in his 80s, yeah.
Okay, I think I know who he is.
Yeah.
You do. You'd know him.
Working through grief, the normal experiences there, stuff like shock and fear and anger, and you can come and go through those. Once you get through one, that doesn't mean you're not going to revisit it again. Deep sadness, no purpose, no energy, you can't concentrate. Eating and sleeping can be tough. Envious of others. Either your faith gets stronger or it gets weaker. Those are some of the things that happen as we work through it. Then manage the loss. How you spend your time can help or set you back. Don't ask how long it's going to last, but how you're going to accept it. And you don't really ever get over it. You get through it. And you're, I think of Jacob all night wrestling with the angel. He comes out of it with the dislocated hip and a limp. So, yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. and make a little connection with that loved one every day. So something that keeps y'all connected. And what is our hope? This is a great step in rebuilding. Remember, we've got hope. Death is not the end. There's life after. Actually, I love what N.T. Wright, he doesn't talk about life after death. He talks about life after death. And that there's, because even when we die, assuming Christ has not come back by that time, that's still a time of waiting for the final consummation of all things. And so there is sort of an intermediary time, and we will, 1 Corinthians 15, Paul talks about the dead in Christ will be raised first, and then we who are alive will follow and meet them in the clouds, and then comes the judgment, and then comes the new creation. So we all, the living and the dead, we still have the judgment to go through, and then the new creation. So, but we have that hope in Christ. We will be judged with extreme mercy. So, and even though
after death.
Yeah, life after death.
I listen to his podcast. He's so common sense. He's real easy to listen to.
He has a book that C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity, to me, makes so much sense. And N.T. Wright's book, and I can't remember it, but it's sort of his version of Mere Christianity. I was like, okay, here's the update of Mere Christianity. Still not as good as C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity.
I haven't read that.
Oh.
So I'm bad. I'm bad about not reading C.S. Lewis and. But.
See, I'm not big on his fantasy stuff because I'm not a fan. When I was a kid, I liked Tom Sawyer and John Wayne, and I liked earthy stuff. Yeah. But his theology, I think my favorite book ever is The Great Divorce, which is not about ending a marriage. It's about a bus trip to heaven, and is a really cool story.
My kids have all read them, and I need to know about that. That's on my list to do, but I've never done it.
Well, anyway, we've got hope in Christ, and though we still grieve, but we grieve with faith. And we look to one who died on the cross and rose again. So invite Jesus into that process, and he'll walk with you through it. And there's some quotes there that in the funeral service we hear, to your faithful people, life has changed, not ended. And 1 Thessalonians, Paul says, we don't want you to be uninformed about those who have died, so that you may not grieve as others who have no hope. For since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so through Jesus God will bring with him those who have died. And then this quote from a book, although this life has to end, love doesn't. Love doesn't end. So I love that. Then we start thinking about the funeral service. What is it that the funeral does? It helps us to acknowledge that someone we love has died. It helps us to remember, helps us to reflect, social support, meaning of life questions, and death. And then it gives hope, continuity and hope for the living. When we go out in the light of the risen Christ. And so that's kind of what the purpose of our funeral services is. And I think that's the end of that presentation. The next section is to go through this, and this is something, we're going to stop the video here.